Should now be live on YouTube. I'm going to make Christina host again.
Christina, I just sent you a message.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
I think it's 6:30. Yes, it is 6:30.
Okay, I'm admitting people from the waiting room.
Thank you. All right. We all here?
Yes.
Okay. A few more dings. This is Julie Bitzer, President of Reston Association, and I'd like to welcome our community to our special meeting of the Board of Directors on Thursday, October 8th. This particular special meeting is focused on a review of our capital projects, our forecasting and funding process, and looking at how we might adapt and address our future needs. General remarks. Well, first, let me do quorum. I see so many faces on the screen at the moment. So I'll go through. And this special meeting, we have invited both our fiscal committee, chaired by David Kerr, and our recreation facilities working group, which is chaired by Tom Mulcairn. So board members I see present on my Zoom screen are Karen Anton, Hunters Woods, John Mooney, North Point, Bob Petrine, member at large, Sarah, a member at large, Mike Collins, apartment rep. I know that Tom Mulcairn will join us as soon as possible. He might not make it. And I do not see Ben. And I'm not seeing Aaron. Is that correct?
I don't see either one.
I'm not seeing Tom, Aaron, or Ben.
Okay, so we do have quorum by having 6, so we can continue. I would like to acknowledge tonight, I think, Christine, you will be on a special leave of absence for the next couple of months. And I want to acknowledge what a great contributions you've made to us since you've joined us. It's with my pleasure that I shepherd you off on your leave as you and your family prepare to welcome a new son into the Reston community. So thank you very much, and may all be well and healthy and happy, and be an exciting event. So
thank you.
I wanted to acknowledge how special you have been to us since you've joined us.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Tonight, we will have the chat room open, but as always, in our normal meetings, a chat room is not something we kind of have. So please feel free to put comments there, but recognize that they will not necessarily be recognized or addressed by the board. I'd like the board members to really focus, and the working group and the recreation working group and the fiscal to focus on the topic and materials being presented. We have a pretty serious agenda tonight, so but we will have the chat room open, and I believe we are going to try to record it so that we can get back to those with comments. I'd like to a motion to adopt the meeting agenda as presented.
Madam Chairman, before we do that, there is one minor thing that needs correcting. We have a Larry Butlery as the presenter for item G. If that could be corrected just for the.
Oh, I see. It was right on H, but not right on G.
Yeah.
Gee, Larry, why didn't you notice that your name was spelled wrong? With that correction, might I have a motion to adopt the meeting agenda as presented?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, all six of us. See if I can count 6 hands. Mine, Karen, John, Bob, Sarah, and Mike, a verbal.
Aye.
Thank you very much. So moved. Member comments. So who do we have, Christina, that would like to speak during member comments?
So I received a request from Ken Fredgren. And Ken, I'm trying to unmute you right now.
I just unmuted myself.
Okay.
What you did.
Thanks, Christina.
There you are.
Good evening, all. Thank you for your continued service to our community and for the opportunity to be here tonight. I am Ken Fredgren, and I serve as chairman of Reston Accessibility Committee, known as RAC, a committee of Reston Citizens Association. Representing RAC, I ask for your budgetary support for 4 projects. 2 of them are automatic door openers, one for Nature House and one for the Lake House. We first suggested these access remedies in June 2014 for Nature House and June 2017 for the Lake House. Despite positive communications with staff over the years, those access improvements have not been made. Both facilities are advertised to the public for family and other events. As you may know, the main entrance doors to Nature House are very heavy. On April 23rd this year, we submitted to Hank Lynch with copies to Larry Butler and Laura Kowalski an accessibility assessment of Temporary Road Park, recommending remedies of accessibility issues for Americans with Disabilities Act specs. On July 18th this year, we submitted to Hank with the same CCs an accessibility assessment of North Hills Park, again recommending remedies of accessibility issues. For both parks, the remedies include accessible parking spaces, an accessible route from the parking lot to the pavilion, improved access to grills and fountains, to trash and recycling receptacles, and to accessible outdoor restrooms. As an example of RA's conscientious commitment to accessibility improvements, in November 2017, board members approved similar improvements for Pony Barn Park, which were completed in the spring of 2019. It stands today as an attractive, exemplary community facility, accessible to all. 2 points with regard to the parks. First, Larry Butler, accompanied by a contractor and landscape architect, visited both parks, finding the suggested remedies in our illustrated accessibility assessments practical and feasible. The temporary road parking lot already has been scheduled for repair, resurfacing, and restriping in 2021. So that is a convenient coincidence. We're hoping that the North Hills Park accessibility improvements will be scheduled for 2022. Second, the illustrated accessibility assessments for the parks are available at our website, restonaccessibility.org. Go to the Projects tab and then click on Projects Summary. Projects are listed in alphabetical order. Thanks again for this time. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Ken. It's good to hear from you and good to get the perspectives from your organization. Appreciate that. Do we have anyone else who would like to make comments at this time?
I believe Sarah Selvridge D'Souza would like to comment.
Hi, I'm going to turn off my camera so I don't get interrupted with my glitchy internet. Sarah D'Souza, 2118 Greenwich Way, Reston, Virginia. I'm making this comment as a member versus a board member because some comments today have been concerning to me. Repeatedly, we've heard the officers meeting, and we've had this conversation a while back, and I've asked, can we please make it official? Have an officers committee or an executive committee, and let's record it, follow POA, be it open so there's transparency. Once again tonight, I hear we've had multiple officers meetings, and Julie, in the opening, you talked about decisions that were made regarding chat. I just request that my comments be included to the minutes of this meeting, and please that if we're going to have these meetings, follow POA, follow the rules. Let's not do business in secret in the shadows. If you're having the officers and the staff meeting, let's do it in public, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Anyone else? Okay, off we go. Item D, review current capital projects forecasting and fundraising process. Chris, I believe you're going to lead us in this conversation.
Yes, I am. Let me get this pulled up for you one moment.
Would any of the officers like to address the comment that I just made, or are we going to just ignore it and move on?
As far as POA, a public board meeting is 5 board members. So, but we
Tony, would you like to elaborate on POA regarding meetings of subcommittees?
POA requires that any meeting of the board or any established committee be open to the public. The officers meeting does, because we do not have an executive committee, which is unusual for a nonprofit, but I believe we don't have an executive committee because we have BOC and BGC. Because it's not an official committee, it is a meeting of 4 directors, which does not constitute quorum, which does not meet a because it does not constitute quorum, does not constitute an official meeting of a board or committee, and therefore it is not required to be open to the public.
Is that your opinion, or is that exactly what POA says? Because I remember POA saying, as long as business is not conducted. Unfortunately, the officers are conducting business.
It's a matter of operation. Because quorum is not present, you cannot conduct business without quorum of the board.
Isn't directing staff part of business, Tony?
It's an interesting question. Pursuant to our resolution 5, the only way that the board of directors may direct staff is through the president. So to the extent that staff has been directed, it would have to be in accordance with the board's wishes at a board meeting that was properly held, and it would come through the president in that instance. Individual directors nor committees are empowered to resolutions to direct staff.
Further, Sarah, we do have queued up for the October 22nd meeting an open discussion on transparency, consent, a number of items. And I specifically put that on our BOC agenda so that we could discuss some of these similar items. So if we could continue.
Can I at least request that we have a calendar of when these meetings occur and agenda items? What is being discussed? That's all we need to know. And conducting business, you did conduct business today by directing staff, but if council's gonna work in the gray, I have no comments at the moment. I just warned the board against doing this because we promised for transparency and this is not the right step. Thank you.
We may have a difference of opinion on that, but let's get going, Chris. We've got a lot.
You don't believe in transparency? Is that the difference of opinion?
I believe our interpretation of what has happened differs. So if we might take that off, I'd like to have a conversation with you about it so you understand what indeed has occurred and not occurred, but no decisions were made by the officers and staff. So
Is it my understanding that we'll take up the issue of an executive committee in October at the next meeting?
That wasn't part of the discussion on openness.
Okay.
We've discussed whether or not there should be an executive committee. In the past, just over the course of the years, the topic has come up and has gone back. We've talked about whether or not there was such a need, given we have BGC and BOC. So
then stop having the meetings, Julie.
Folks, can I intervene here? We have a meeting on the budget tonight.
right.
Our public is listening, staff is listening. There's no reason to do this now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Chris, would you go ahead and begin, please?
Sure. Good evening. So like you said, we are here to present some items regarding the capital budget for 2021, but we're going to start off with a couple kind of quick summaries here. So the first item is to review the RA capital forecasting and funding, which kind of entails the 10-year reserve study, the rolling average, minimum balance, the repair replacement reserve fund or RRF, the capital asset acquisition reserve fund or CARF, and the capital budget development process. And then we'll get into the future major capital projects and funding impacts, as well as the charter and the role of the Recreation Facilities Working Group. We'll, of course, talk a little bit about Lake Throw, that project, and then get into the funding and planning recommendations moving forward. So starting off, the reserve study, kind of give you a quick overline here. So in 2019, we conducted a reserve study. This is a state requirement that's done every 5 years. This study was performed by DMA Reserves. I know there's a little bit of confusion as to who or what that was, but that was our hired consultant who performed the study. They are a certified engineering firm that is, able to do these types of jobs. In 2019, they identified about 1,300 capital assets. That was about 400 more than the 2014 study. And so what that study does is they do a replacement cycle and schedule and estimated costs for like replacements of our assets. And a capital asset in Reston Association is defined as any asset that has a value greater than $5,000 in its replacement and has at least a 3-year life expectancy. This is generally the definition. There are a few caveats to that, but that's kind of what you can assume as your typical capital asset definition. So the reserve study, I want to kind of get into this a little bit to kind of clear up some things. So a reserve study only counts for like replacements. And so they cannot account for things like future changes because they're not always known. And therefore, if they're not known, it's hard to physically evaluate them and then give them an estimated cost or replacement schedule. There are some minor things we can do, like material changes when we go from a cedar lap siding and then knowing we're going to go to a cementitious board like hardy plank. That's something we can pretty easily account for, but we're not changing the amount of square footage that we're doing or anything of that nature. So we're just, that's a minor change we could do. The reserve study is not a required maintenance, replacement, or funding schedule. It's a tool. It's a tool that we use to help develop our funding and planning strategies for capital improvements on an asset by asset basis. And as a result, the schedules and costs are regularly updated by the staff. Following the initial study, we have to kind of go through it. There's continued updates that happen as new information comes in. These are examples like we have our spring and fall inspections from all the different departments, board directives, if we have anything that's new or changes or focus is done, new codes from either Fairfax County, federal codes, past experience. We did this one project before and, some new information came about or a new technique or process that we want to do that we've seen better results. We'll implement those kind of changes. And then just best practices for construction, which really boils down to, if you're going to go into a bathhouse and you're going to replace these bathroom partitions, but then leave a 20-year-old toilet behind it, it really doesn't make a lot of sense. So it's better to then combine certain types of projects and assets in the replacement schedule together because you'll get better economies of scale and just more of an impact to the results that you're making. So the reserve study limitations for major projects. And I'm talking, we're speaking about renovations or full scale, projects on a site. So because of its like-for-like replacement, a lot of attributes get missed when you start talking about a major project. This can include the soft costs beyond like-for-like replacement. So you've got permit fees, engineering fees, and all those types of things. Typically a permit fee averages around 4.1% of the total project cost. And so that fee alone can vary greatly depending on how much the total project is going to cost you. Americans with Disability Act compliance standards. A lot of our facilities, or the vast majority, were built before 1990 when the act went into place. So many of our facilities are not necessarily compliant. We've made our efforts over the years to try to make them more compliant, but there's still a lot of things we just can't do without having to do more of a larger scale type of renovation. Fairfax County health and building codes, those change. Earlier on, we did the pool constructions. They didn't require bathhouse ventilation systems. New ones do. And so things like that can't be accounted for because they don't currently exist. And then non-capital items that are included during renovation, things like painting. Painting is typically not something you capitalize. Furniture, signage, things of that nature that are small pieces, but when you add them into the cost of a larger project, they start to add up. So these are just kind of a couple examples of limitations that you see typically in a reserve study. So getting into the 10-year average, the minimum balance, and the triple RF. So this is kind of a summary of what kind of drives our. Sorry.
Excuse me, I just want to ask a point of question. Can we discuss some of these things as we go along, as opposed to just get the presentation? Because I've got some questions on that last slide I'd like to make.
Yes, David, this is meant to be a working session, so I do encourage both fiscal and recreational facilities folks to, raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to ask a question. And Chris and staff, I hope that will be acceptable to you.
Sure.
So do you want to go back a slide? Is that the one you wanted?
That's the one. Yep.
What's going on?
Yeah, obviously there are concerns. I mean, if the reserve study does not cover the cost to replace, then there's something wrong. I think the way we've written our resolution is there's an expectation that we get a replacement cost. Well, you can't say that it's not up to code and is a replacement. I guess a couple of things. One, when we brought in the reserve study folks this last time, we were told it was going to cost more because they were going to add soft costs. And I guess they haven't, or didn't, okay, which would be important to know, okay. I wonder why they wouldn't be able to add in ADA compliance standards when they come up with numbers, or why they can't add in at least the current building codes. So I would hope that next time we do this, maybe we get a better product if they're able to provide those types of added knowledge into the numbers.
So I can kind of go through a couple of those points. So they do include soft costs, but when you're talking about a like-for-like replacement, we've traditionally done as part of major renovations. We typically, and Larry, correct me if I'm wrong, we've traditionally never gone back exactly as it was. Uplands, Glade, the other, Dogwood, any of those facilities that we've done, we did not go back in exactly the way it was. We changed it. And in terms of the, ADA compliance standards, knowing exactly what you have to do a full-fledged survey of the site in terms of you have to shoot grades to find elevation pitches. You have to take a lot of additional measurements, and reserve study, engineers, they go in and just do a visual inspection, and they'll give you some comments, and they can make a comments like, we don't believe this is fully ADA compliant, but it's really hard for them to come up with a cost of something when they don't even know what it would end up looking like. They're not architects or engineers, and they're not designing anything. They're just there to evaluate what's there. So asking them to try to come up with the expense of making something ADA without any information other than what they're just, they can kind of see is exceptionally difficult. But I mean, we could try to leverage that a bit more, but from my understanding from the reserve studies, it's not something that can really account for.
And I'll just add, Chris, that reserve studies typically done under the statute. It's to create the minimum funding required to do a like-for-like replacement. So it is, it's really our duty, and when Chris is going to get into putting the capital budget part a little bit later here, it's our duty to put that together. And as Chris said in one of the earlier slides, the reserve study is sort of that minimum funding to do like for like, and that's just one data point that we use when we put the capital budgets together.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
what I'm wondering is, when we do this next, could we at least have our reserve study engineers annotate each facility with a qualitative note that this does not meet ADA, without opining on the costs of doing so, simply annotate that this needs to be done?
I think that makes sense, because when we look at, our typical key decision, our life cycle costs, we have those key decision points so that when the initial one on the scoping and the project initiation, that element does not get missed. I know, David, you have a couple slides you want to share with us too, so I'm looking for the right break point in Chris's presentation so we don't lose the triple R.
Can I make an observation? This particular, the latest reserve study done in 2019 did add, and Chris, tell me if I'm overstating, provided a database of useful information that could be updated periodically by, or not periodically, but on an ongoing basis by staff. And that might be a basis on which to, add these component additions as an estimate. Or is that overstating the capacity of the system they provide?
Yeah, they do provide us the database that had a lot of, typically they give you about a 1 or 2 sentence, quick blurb about, each asset, specifically ones that they consider, substantial to take note of. The retaining wall at Throw, they made note of like this wall is in, it's in disrepair. It's not disrepair, but it's definitely in a point where it's due for its replacement cycle. And they noted that there was, areas that had parts, kind of pulling off of it. So they make some really quick general comments, but you got to keep in mind the scope of what you're looking at. It's 1,300 assets over, I think thousands of acres we've got. And so that's a lot of ground to cover. And they do their best to try to capture everything that they can. But when you kind of think about the scope of the work and trying to get into that sort of finite detail on evaluating, to the degree for ADA compliance, it's quite a big ask. Now, I would suggest perhaps we would probably need to bring on maybe someone that's more of a specialist in ADA compliance standards that can maybe do more of an audit or survey of our facilities. That would probably give us a little bit better detail for something like that.
So can I make a comment? So two things. One is, when we're talking about different issues, like I think we get very hooked, and I know I'm new here and I've only sat in a couple of meetings, to like one key word, like ADA wasn't part of the cost. But as a member, when I look at, all the big decisions we have to make over the next year or two, I kind of think of these 1,300 assets in different groups. Like I think of pools as one group of assets, and it's really challenging when we're talking about Lake Thorough. If we're talking about sinking, $3 million into that pool and not understanding the impact on the total pool assets of the association. It would be the same thing if we were thinking about tennis courts, and the same issue came up with tennis courts. It's very hard to kind of look at, it's not just 13 capital assets, but it's like, of this reserve study, I haven't seen the reserve study. I'm not really sure where I can get my hands on that, but it's like the pool assets, like, because the association has a requirement to the members to provide pool services. And then if you look at all the pool assets together, it's easier to kind of make the decisions about whether to do or not to do something tend to be more obvious when you're considering all the pools together as a single asset.
Yes, and part of the flow of this meeting, we're also going to cover the recreational facilities working group, where some of those things that are being worked. Lisa, so I thank you for your comments. Shall we allow Chris to finish his discussion about the reserve funds?
Yes.
Okay. So the repair replacement reserve fund is our fund to replace the existing assets in our inventory. So it's funded annually via the assessment according to the 10-year rolling average. And you can see in this little graphic over here, basically what it does. So we have all of our expenses, and it just pulls the average for the next 10 years. And that's what we basically set as our annual contribution. It's done this way to avoid erratic contribution needs from the membership from year to year. So then instead of having, 1 year real high and then another low, it just kind of keeps it at a pretty steady level. And so as a result, some years we fund more than what we need, and then other years we fund less. But the concept is to kind of maintain it at a certain level so it, we always have what we need. And then in addition to that, we have the minimum balance, which is 10% of that 10-year rolling average. And it's used as a contingency and also for any kind of sudden demands. So the capital asset acquisition reserve fund. So this is a separate fund that is used to fund new things that aren't currently in our asset inventory. And it's funded on an as needed basis for new assets. So once a CARF project is completed, it's then entered into the asset inventory and then included with all the other RRF assets for future replacement. So replacement of existing vehicles and equipment are considered a RRF expense. And the purchase of new equipment or vehicles we don't currently have in our fleet are then CARF. So an example would be, we have a 2001 Ford F-150 and we sell or trade that for a new 2020 F-150, that's a RRF. When we bought the camp buses or the spider lift, which is that image to your right, those are things we didn't currently have. And so those were new acquisitions and therefore it came out of the CARF fund instead. So just kind of a quick graphic of kind of sort of our capital budget development. So going through the process, we start on the left side. And so this is when we create the project listing. And so we create that listing by taking the reserve study schedule, that's one element, the best practices of construction, like I mentioned before, the annual inspections that are performed, and then any board directives. And so all those pieces together kind of coalesce and create the project list. And so we have a project list for 2020 and then 2021. So we take that list and then we move into the actual budget development process. And so the first thing we start off with is we use the reserve study cost estimates they provide. Then we input our prior experience from recent projects or other similar projects, contractor rough order magnitude costs. So we'll do walkthroughs with trusted contractors or engineers to kind of give us a better idea on complex projects like Lake Throw. And then just research, contacting other local localities that have done similar projects, speaking to other people and just talking and just getting the information. And so we take all that together and we create the capital budget. So getting into the major projects outlook. So when you go through the reserve study from its current schedule, we had a total of 10 major pool and tennis projects between 2021 and 2031. And a major project in this exercise we did was anything that we saw that was over $250,000. Now this excludes Lake Ann Dam, which is another matter. Revised estimates were generated by a best guess. So what we did is we looked at each current reserve funding amount. We evaluated some of the attributes of the site that we believe are questionable, such as the ADA access or any code compliance issues. And then we kind of took our prior experience in between Larry, myself, and other team members. We have about 60 years worth of experience in a lot of these facilities. And we kind of created this, a really rough order magnitude cost estimate. So it's our best guess. And so, as a result, we then plotted this all against each other in each site. And so you can see in the graphic below, you have this gray line, which is the delta, which is the difference between what the reserve study estimate says versus what our revised estimate approximates it to be. And for each project in the next few years, you got Lake Throw Pool, Newport Tennis, Ridge Heights Pool, Glade Tennis, Shadowwood Pool, Lake Audubon Pool, Newbridge Pool, Shadowwood Tennis, Newbridge Tennis, and Tall Oaks Pool all coming up. Now, a question you might have is, there's a lot of these projects all kind of pooling up together in this short period of time. Well, also keep in mind, a lot of these facilities were built around the same time. And as a result, they'll have, similar life cycle time periods. Your typical pool will have about a 30 to 40 year lifespan. And many of our facilities are at that age or even beyond. So when we plot all this together, we kind of worked out the delta. We're seeing that there's a potential for about a $4.1 million deficit in terms of what the reserve study estimates we would be looking at versus what we have more of a gut feeling it will be. And again, this is going to require a lot more research. It's going to require some member input, and we're going to do maybe some actually more architecture and engineering work to get more accurate cost estimates.
Is that 4.1 delta just on the pool assets of the reserve study? Or are you talking, because the reserve study was pool, tennis courts, trails, all the other capital products. So is this, what of that reserve study was pool assets, and is this delta just on the pool assets of the reserve study?
So this delta is just on the projects you see right in front of you.
Okay.
Ones I listed out, it's just, if you add up all these gray lines together, it's 4.1. So it's kind
of, this is just on the pool. So we haven't done this with tennis courts to see what the delta, like all the different groups of assets.
This includes some tennis courts as well. If you look at the projects, it's a combination of pool tennis courts, which tend to be our most expensive renovation projects.
Got it.
I think Lisa, if I will make sure that you get the latest reserve study.
Okay.
And it shows in rapt detail all of this information and assembles the components of what is considered part of Lake Thoreau Pool in one spot. So the fences and the pumps and everything that goes into the 1,300 assets that Chris is talking about.
I guess what I'm sorry that I'm not being clear. I guess I want that study. I mean, that would be very helpful. But look, this says a total of 10 major pool and tennis projects. So if we were to look at trails, bridges, nature house, all the other things, is this delta really going to be 10 million, or is this delta really and truly 4 million over the next 10 years?
So the primary focus, was just the pool and tennis, but we also focused on anything that was going to be over $250,000. So a lot of our other assets would never even reach that threshold.
Got it.
Our pathways are done basically on an allowance basis. We factor about a certain percentage of the overall trail network, and we set a fund every year to do trail work. Footbridges, they're usually far less than, even 100,000.
Yeah.
So there's not a lot of other assets out there that are going to breach that $250,000 threshold. And that's what we sort of set as considered a major project if it was over that $250,000 mark.
So are you feeling good then that this 4.1 is, I guess that's the question, or is it we would need to do more, a better look at as part of the next year to kind of say, okay, maybe the delta is not 10 million, but maybe the delta is 6 million, just because there's going to be all these differences across all the different groups of assets.
And a lot of it will, yeah, and a lot of it will also be driven by, you know, the facilities working group in terms of what the needs and demands are from the public in terms of what they're looking to do. But it was just going to require a lot more time and consideration, and maybe some, you know, a little bit extra engineering to look at things more detailed. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
And that's also part, if I remember correctly, why Chris and Larry, we added into our major projects a phase to do that preliminary study and analysis, because we knew the reserve studies was not capturing some of those soft costs, some of the additional things like ADA and whatever. We needed a better handle on the front end of what the cost might be. And that's kind of what happened in the Lake Thoreau pool analysis, right?
Right, and Chris is going to cover the, you know, so those key decision points. He'll cover that a little later in his presentation.
Yeah. Okay.
Any other questions?
No, I do have one question, and I'm trying to look at whether it makes more sense. Fiscal David Kerr had 2 slides he wanted to cover with regard to our triple RF. And my thought was to have him cover those either, you know, now as you've just kind of finished talking about our triple RF, or after you've covered the major projects outlook where you've gone into more detail.
I think maybe perhaps we get into the facilities working group. Maybe it might be a good spot for that.
So we'll do it after you finish up and before we do the recreational facilities.
That's just a suggestion, yeah.
Okay, that's kind of where I had it. So that's what I told David. So continue on.
So next I want to kind of hit on, you know, the first couple major facilities that we see coming up. So the first one is Lake Newport Tennis. So this facility was built in about 1986. And this year we had color coding and lighting that was scheduled. And so when we started getting into the, you know, development of that project and getting it moving, we had to do a little bit of additional legwork when we first started kind of looking at this. And what we discovered is that it has multiple layers of asphalt that have encapsulated all the pole lights. So we went and excavated every single pole light on that facility to see what we're looking at underneath. And we discovered that a lot of the footers are in pretty rough shape, and the risk of actually causing more damage and repair trying to remove these poles and put new ones in was likely going to end up needing way more work, to the point where it probably wouldn't be worth it just trying to do that. You'd have saw cuts and then these giant sections being chopped out of all the courts. So we're looking right now to just defer that project until 2022. We evaluate everything. Everything is, you know, stable and safe, but to do a light swap at that facility is likely going to require more intensive type of work. So for the time being, we've pushed it down a few years past, and then maybe reevaluate it as looking at it as a more of a larger scale renovation instead. Because there's a lot of other elements on that site that are also going to need to be addressed, and it's going to make a lot more sense to do that all at once rather than trying to do it piecemeal. So this is one example. Another one is Ridge Heights. So this facility was built in 1982, and as you've ever been there, you might notice it's got a lot of tree cover. So typically speaking, you get about a 7 to 10 year life expectancy out of a pool plaster, which is that, you know, coating that goes the inside of the pool, that white coating. Well, that facility, we get about 4 to 5 years. And that's typically just because it's accelerated by tree droppings and just the environment that's in. We've added pool covers, which should help. But, you know, it's going to be due here. And so we've accumulated about probably 2 inches worth of plaster on the interior of that pool basin. And so if you add any more plaster to this point, you're not going to get a very good result. It's probably going to fail even faster. In addition, you know, the former bubble enclosure that we had at that facility has really segmented up that concrete deck quite a bit. So this image you can see to the right, there's control joints everywhere. There were these large concrete anchors that were in the deck that were removed because they were just these hazards that people were walking into for a while. So we removed all of them, but the deck is now fragmented in all these different pieces. So you have different grade changes, elevations. And so, you know, you should really evaluate looking at this entire deck over again to get it just back onto a level playing field again. And another item is the parking lot, the bathhouse, and the storm drainage would likely have to be modified if we ever got into a larger scale type of project there. And so they all need to be brought up to code. So that's just one detail that we sort of noted as part of this facility. The next one was Glade Tennis. So this was converted from asphalt into a clay court back in 1999. And so the, pardon me, the drainage and subsurface irrigations had been ongoing issues for the last couple of seasons. And it may be attributed to the tree impact that we had back in April 2018. We had about 4 or 5 very large pine trees fall. You can see a picture there of when it happened. And then the picture below, you can kind of see the drainage issues with a lot of the wash off of the court. So there's a lot of grading issues that need to be addressed there. And just the drainage out of the court is in pretty rough shape. The lighting there is also obsolete. It works on metal halide. It's not energy efficient by any means. And it really needs to be looked at from a full system replacement. And so as a result, we'd suggest doing a full scale renovation like we did over at North Hills Tennis just the other year. And also integrating any other type of ADA access enhancements that we could do as part of that. So the last one I believe is the Shadowwood Pool. So this was built back in 1976, and it had a facelift back in 2008, but we didn't make any major bathroom utilities or pool upgrades at that time. And so you can see the picture on the bottom hand. You can see what it used to look like before 2008, and then a picture that I believe was from earlier this year. So we just made a lot of cosmetic changes. We changed the fencing. We did some siding work. So again, just like Ridge Heights, it's got a lot of tree cover. So we've seen a shortened plaster life cycle of this facility. So it too, it has an accumulation of plaster. It also has a very unusual shape. It's got this kind of rounded end, so it doesn't really provide lap simming very easily. We've also had ongoing issues with the sewage system. Since it's all cast iron, it's corroded. So we've had some multiple problems with that. And again, because of its location, doing any type of major scale renovation work there where you have to implement some of the ADA enhancements would be difficult because it's a long way from the parking lot. So you have to work with some grade changes as well because it does raise up an elevation. And then combine that with the fact that the parking lot is not particularly large, especially when you consider that it shares not just for tennis users, but also for pool users. And that parking lot is actually about the size or smaller than what Lake Throw is right now. And from that facility just alone, the pool has to support 25 spaces. Well, there's a potential it might even be even more than that if it has to also support a tennis court next to it.
Hey, Chris, when you talked about Ridge Heights,
Mm-hmm.
you didn't say, unless I missed it, you didn't say anything about ADA. Is that pool already closer to being able to address ADA?
No, so there's definitely going to be some parking lot changes that have to be made. There's some grade issues between the nearest ADA spot and the front entrance. You can't have any more than a 2% cross slope in the parking spot, which it's definitely more than that right now. The interior of the bathhouse, we're pretty sure that the shower stalls would be too narrow to meet full ADA compliance, so they'd have to be enlarged. And when you start changing things like the shower stalls, you're basically reconfiguring the interior of it completely to then get it to be within the compliance, turning radiuses and bench seating and things of that nature. So, odds are there would be quite a bit of ADA changes that would have to occur, but until you actually get a full scale, survey of the site done by someone, it's hard to tell. But just from experience, doing a lot of ADA projects, we're definitely looking at having to make some modifications to make it compliant.
Okay, understood. Any more questions of Chris for the material he's presented thus far? Karen.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. At what point do we incur fines or whatever for not being ADA compliant on a facility? I'm thinking of the ones that Ken mentioned in member comments or just in general. How does that work?
So a lot of our facilities are grandfathered. So since they were built, way before that code, they don't necessarily have to be compliant. And then I believe there's also some details regarding the fact that we are a private organization. So there's a little bit of gray area there in terms of what we absolutely have to comply to. Typically speaking, when you do a project that would require a building permit, they would typically have you do some type of ADA enhancements. So it's like 20%, I think, of the project cost has to go towards ADA upgrades, if there are any. But because a lot of our projects are just straight maintenance replacements, you don't need a building permit because you're not changing or doing anything that's different other than just, replacing tile with new tile or, toilets and toilet. You don't need a permit, so you've never run into that situation of actually having to make it compliant.
I think the other important thing as well, Karen, is that as you've seen from the other major facility renovations we've done, we have brought those up to the code that was in place at the time, because we think that is the absolute right thing to do.
Okay.
Most of the, the county's 20% or whatever. We want to make sure that our facilities are accessible when we go into renovation mode.
Thanks.
Okay. David, could you walk us through some analysis that you did on the triple RF?
Can I ask
Oh,
a
I'm sorry,
question?
John. I didn't see you wanted to ask a question. Go ahead.
Chris, I have a couple of questions. One was,
Sarah was going to
Wait a
ask
minute.
a question.
John, did you wish to?
No, I was pointing to Sarah had.
Oh, okay, sorry. Sarah, go ahead.
thank you, John. Thank you. Chris, I have three quick questions. One is a follow-up to what Karen asked. If we had to convert all of our facilities to be ADA compliant, do we know what the cost implication will be? So that we go down 10 years down the road, I'm sure ADA is going to be more and more prevalent, not less, so we can kind of get a jump on it.
Without giving a specific answer, I think it would be millions of dollars.
Okay, so it's not like a few more steps that we could take in to avoid the cost down the line?
Well, that's what I said earlier. As we go into the renovations, that's when we make the commitment to make them accessible.
Okay. And second question, yeah, go ahead, Larry. Sorry.
Doing the site disturbance and so forth. I mean, it makes total sense to do it at that time.
Okay, thank you. Second question I had was, you are talking about deferring a few projects because they're probably extensive repairs that need to be done. Have we projected what those costs are going to be when they come up in a few years?
We have started putting together some of those numbers, but it's going to require more engineering work to actually determine that. Trying to get rough order of magnitude costs from anyone right now on a project like tennis renovations, they typically are looking for at least some kind of detail, either a conceptual drawing, a little bit of survey. I mean, they can get you a number, but it's really loose. You're talking upwards of 25 to 30% plus or minus. Sometimes even higher. So until you actually have some more engineering work done, getting really accurate costs is exceptionally difficult. But we've tried to at least sort of use recent experience between the numbers we've been seeing for like Hook Road renovation or North Hills renovation, which are our two most recent tennis court renos. We're using a lot of that data to kind of help drive our updated estimates, but it's an evolving process.
Fantastic. And last question, and I'll give it back to Karen, I think. On your slide with the cost difference, what happened with Shadowwood? Because we seem like we're almost spot on Shadowwood, whereas the others, there's a lot of difference. So if we know what we did right on Shadowwood, maybe we can follow that for the others.
You mean for the pool?
For the Shadowwood pool, I think the estimated reserves and the projected seem to be very close.
I only see the Shadowwood tennis.
We don't
Talk about slide.
take a look at it real quick.
They're both there.
Oh,
It's the sixth one down.
yeah,
Fifth.
right.
It's showing about a 320,000 difference, Chris. From
For the
the
kids like me, the orange and blue lines are really close there. So,
and like I said, those are very, they're best guesses, but there's a good chance it could be more than that. But we know at a minimum it's not enough. That basically that exercise just went through, looked at what we currently had in the reserve study, used some of our best guesses and experience, and we can just flag it right now that what it's in there is not going to be enough, so we need to evaluate it further.
Chris, I think it might be valuable if you also explained that Lake Throw Pool was looked at by Kinley Horn, and the rest of these where you guys had developed the delta was internal.
Yes.
Correct?
Correct.
Right.
thank you.
Analysis. Karen.
I don't want to take up a lot of time. You mentioned Hook Road though, Chris, and I'm just wondering, and you probably have addressed this in previous board meetings, but where are we with that and what the working group had recommended?
You will actually hear a little bit about that tonight during the executive session.
Excellent, thank you. Although is there anything that you can say in open session so our members can hear? Just as far as where the project
getting
is?
close on wanting to move forward with the tennis court renovation work, assuming, board approval.
Yeah, you're presenting some contracts to us later tonight.
Correct.
But essentially,
Road was one of them.
you're moving forward with some of the, I think you had said that you've broke Hook Road up into different groups of things, right? So you've got a couple that you were going to try to move on yet this year. I think you shared that with us last meeting. Whether it's the tennis or other parts of that facility, but I know you had broken the working group and you all had broken it up into phases that you could bring stuff in, right?
Yeah, there's multiple different pieces we're kind of working on implementing slowly. I mean, we're in some discussions with, VDOT over some things regarding the traffic calming. I think County actually. We're working on the tennis court. There's some ball field stuff we're looking to get started next year. And then there's going to be some other elements that were part of that working group that we're looking to start presenting to you probably as part of the next budget cycle.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Any more questions of Chris, or can we shift to some thoughts that David Kerr would like to share with us? All right. Christina, can you pull up David's slides, or David, are you going to do that?
Would love it if Christina could do it.
Sure.
Okay, let's hit the real slide. Okay, so again, my focus here is obviously on the financial side. Whether people like pools or don't like pools, or like tennis courts, or wanted, all these things, those are important topics, but not our focus tonight. We're trying to think of, from a financial point of view, kind of how did we get to where we are, where like it seems like we need money tomorrow. And so I want to talk a little bit about forecasting and a little about funding. Okay, we tend to focus a lot on the minimum annual reserve balance, and the problem with the reserve balance, the resolution that requires a reserve balance, is that it is written in as the balance we need to carry in cash at any time, at any period of time. But when we do our projections, when we do it with approved budget, not cash. So we're always underestimating the amount of cash we have. So on the right-hand side of this page, I believe I've used staff numbers everywhere I can, okay? But at the end of this year, okay, one of the early slides had us down to 3.4 million under the what if scenario of doing a lot of these heavy projects sooner than later. And based on the numbers that we're seeing right now, we should have about 2 million more than that, because we're going to carry over some projects. We've also got positive variances we'll book, okay? When I say book, we keep them in RRF to support future funding needs, okay? And if we look at the current funding plan, okay, and how much we're going to spend, okay, which is 3.4 million. At the end of next year, we should be a couple million more than we say when we look at an approved budget. So I just want to be careful we don't pay a lot of attention to the minimum balance, okay? It doesn't mean we don't have a problem, okay? We need funding, okay? But we need to look at the replacement cost for all 10 years. We need to make sure we're discussing in detail the projects and their associated timing, okay? And we need to be willing to review previously approved projects on whether they're continued or not. Not to mention all of the work that RFWG is going to do, which is going to be very important, and I would argue pools are probably the main thing they should be talking about. Can we go to the next slide, Christina? So I apologize for this. It was done in haste. I'll try to explain it the best I can. Okay. The top line that says "What if requirements." This is the what if we need to cover these major projects? Okay, how are we gonna deal with the funding? And my first question is really, the arrow here and the circle here is the first several years. I'm assuming those are pretty good replacement costs. Okay, my question is the second half of the 10-year plan replacement cost, or is it existing numbers that were in the reserve study or previous numbers that we've done? Have we actually looked at the whole 10 years or only the next 4 or 5? And the reason you have to ask that question, okay, is that funding is based on a 10-year average. If the second 5 years is not at full replacement cost, we're underfunding the capital projects dramatically. Okay, so a 10-year average assumes that all 10 years have some level of replacement value in them. Okay, so that's just a question that we need to make sure we pay attention to. Okay, that the whole 10 years, what we're funding and what we're spending is very similar. But the fact that all the spending is up front makes it impossible for the funding to cover it. And we've got to do something about then finding the money to do it. So, and of course, with the latest roundup with Lake Throw Pool and with the what if requirements, okay, we have dramatically increased our next 5 years of spending from what it was just 11 months ago. So from 11 months ago, we've increased the spending we need by something like $3 to $6 million. And we don't have a funding model that will support it. Okay. The other thing I point out here is that the first half of the year, first half of the 10 years requires $8 million more than the second 5 years. So we could probably fund this thing if we didn't have to spend it all in 5 years. Now, I'm not making a case for not spending money. I think we need to find a way to fund it. Okay. I'm just saying, I'm really want to get to a point of we need to fix our forecasting and our funding methodology to get ahead of this a little more. Okay. And that's my single biggest concern is that we're reacting to it and not staying ahead of it. And I would hope that, we, instead of just looking at a 10-year average going forward, we're taking more of a short-term look also and incorporating that in with the 10-year study to try to do a better job of forecasting. The other thing I want to point out is that we tend to budget operating, we create an operating budget and a capital budget, and they're done independently. That's not a good way to do it, okay? Because they're dependent on each other, okay, heavily. Okay, we look at this funding model and think, okay, we look at 10 years, it tells us how much to fund, it tells us how much to spend, and all the funding does is take out kind of the sawtooth effect, and we're okay. Well, no, because the operating margins that you get from the operating budget are the primary funding of your capital. I mean, the way we fund our capital is with the excess margin left over after paying for operating expenses. So if, for instance, so right now we've got an operating budget where the operating margins are dropping. They're going from probably 20% down to 13 or 14%, which means there's less money left over to pay for capital. at the same time, capital budgets are increasing because we have a need with our older assets to fund them. So we're getting a double hit on this from a financial point of view. And I just want to, kind of, I know it's not clear, but hopefully we can do more work with staff and with the board and come up with a better way to both forecast and budget to take into consideration all aspects and make sure we know where we are and then how we can pay for them. I will add a side note: ADA is not a place to start cutting costs.
It's not. David, thank you for your perspectives here. And indeed, that's, the reason for this meeting tonight is to begin those conversations, those ones that we should have been having over the last year or so, as we knew that our infrastructure, that we had a number of pools, for example, stacked up right behind Thoreau. So better now than never. So I appreciate the perspectives you've given on that. Does anyone have some questions of David on what he presented and the thought process that Fiscal has taken to this piece, the triple RF? Okay, so then let's. Hi, Ben. I meant to acknowledge that you had joined us. Did you have a question?
Yes, no worries. Yeah, I have a question for David. So as per the reserve study that was conducted last year, what is it that was found as far as capital reserves? Were we over, under, or just right for the entire membership to hear? If you can give us that summary.
Then just to be clear, so I mean, you mean their projections over time versus, I mean, their spending numbers were light compared to what we are experiencing. So if, I've got a chart that I'll be happy to send to folks, but the reserve study.
As per the policy, I'm not saying as per current experiences, but as per the policy we have established historically, our reserve study was to benchmark what we are setting aside as per the policy we had established. So prior to all this discussions, as per the policy that we've been putting away money aside for capital funds, as per the reserve study, we were more than enough budgeted for it comfortably. Is that correct?
It's not that simple. I guess
we would have.
It's a simple question. As per our policy, we were plenty budgeted. Now we are having all these experiences, so you're having second thoughts about it. That's all my question is.
No, I understand that, but it's
the reserve study wasn't concise enough in the cost that it would take, and the timing of the items they had was not. Just didn't work for the way we felt we needed to get things done. Chris and or Larry should jump in, but yeah, to go back to the reserve study and say, would we be okay? Yeah, but so what? It's not reality, okay? It didn't include the proper costs. It didn't include the proper scoping of some of the jobs, and it definitely didn't include some of the proper timing that we needed to put on some jobs. So, looking at the reserve study and how we're doing against it at this point, I don't think is a valuable exercise.
Let me jump in just for a second. For the vast majority of our assets, replacing tot lots, capping a multi-purpose court, replacing fencing, the reserve study is a very good guide. It is those projects, those complicated projects, quite frankly, where there's county permits involved, ADA, community input for sure. Those are the ones, and we've pegged the next 10 years worth of those where the reserve study does not do as nearly as good a prediction of what those costs will be because of the complicated nature of those projects. But again, I want to reiterate, for the vast majority of our assets, of those 1,300 assets, the reserve study does a pretty good job of saying, here's what we're going to need. And that's why we're really focusing. The chart that Chris put together tonight focuses on those outliers, which are the pool and tennis courts.
And when you consider that when you've created a budget, an operating budget, and you've identified those projects in any given year on the capital side that you want to do, that essentially drives a single number, which is what the assessment has to be. And those are the kinds of issues that on a pay-as-you-go basis work just fine until you have a series of major projects that have to be done. And that's going to increase, that could have a, depending upon how you choose to address the issue, will have a major impact on assessments in the next 5 to 7 years.
Yeah, why
Does that make sense? You know, if you
does
really,
not.
you build it from.
If we can move on, Bob, my point is that if we are going through a budget, if we have algorithms that puts money away in reserve funds, and we've been doing this for years and years, and if our reserve funds is affirming that what we're doing is more than sufficient, then why even have a budget? And if you're going to blow through everything and spend whatever you want anyways, then why have all these budgets and these numbers and reserve studies that confirms what we are doing, because we are spending what we want to do anyways. The moment we understand that we want to spend more, we go ahead and reach into our members' pockets and grab whatever we want and build it out. That's how it sounds like to me, so it doesn't make sense.
Well, I would say that the objective of tonight's meeting is to look and try to have an honest appraisal of what that means, given the series of major projects that have been queued up. And as David has said so clearly, it is a function of given the time since we'll stay with the pools, since Lake Thoreau was done, the reserve study was about maybe a little over $2 million all in to replace in like kind Thoreau pool. The reality is when you actually look at the replacing, even in substantially the same physical characteristics, we're talking about an additional $1.5 million just to get it back to an operating pool and meeting the additional parking spaces that the county requires, the upgrade of the systems and the ADA requirements, as well as keeping the pool from sliding into the lake at some point, have all generated additional costs. And we're trying to anticipate not only this current project, but the impact on the finances going forward. And that's Dave, I think, am I misstating, Dave, what you're trying to point out?
The most important thing here is we need to find a way to do a better job of short-term forecasting and planning, a 3 to 5 year look, because using 30 years doesn't work very well. Again, it has its own purpose. Okay, the 10-year average has its own purpose, but the 10-year average historically, okay, was, taking care of a sawtooth situation, just taking off the peaks and valleys. Well, now we're faced with things that are coming up sooner than we had anticipated, certainly in the reserve study, sooner than we had anticipated even a year ago in some cases. So can we develop a shorter term, something less than 30 and 10 years, okay, that can help us stay on top of what's coming around the corner, okay? Because as I said, 11 months ago, we thought we needed to spend, something like 6 million less than we think we need to spend now. And we need better tools to look at that. I don't know what they are offhand. I mean, I certainly can participate and would like to, fiscal and get involved and work with staff and say what, what kind of things can be developed, but we need some better tools to help us see what's coming in front of us. It's not the reserve study.
John.
David, to anticipate what Chris will talk about on the 23rd slide, I believe it is, staff is recommending a capital improvements plan, which I think addresses or can address your concern for shorter term planning. So frequently capital improvement plans, at least in municipal government, are 5 to 7 years. And it's not a budget, but it's a plan that takes into consideration those major assets that are going to have to be attended to in that short term. So I really applaud that. I think that has been a missing piece in our capital program.
Are there any, Mickey? You have to unmute yourself, Mickey. Mickey, would you like to speak?
There we go.
There you go.
So my only suggestion is that while adding that capital budgeting for the 5 to 7 year, I would encourage to continue to do that 10-year average reserve study as a gauge, just as I would continue that, because I would continue looking at 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, 30 years down the road. I think all of those views should still be utilized.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yes, would agree. And I think there, as Larry had mentioned earlier, we do have a requirement to do the reserve, the 10-year reserve. Let's move to the next item, which is talking about the recreational facilities working group, because as we think about how we pay for what we want, we've got put in place this working group. It's got a short-term task that they've got to do. And so we do have this working group to help us in gathering information, just like we have the fiscal committee in helping us look at how we fund things. And I believe fiscal is, and the treasurer are meeting with the recreational facilities working group. I think it's tomorrow.
Next week.
Next week, okay. So Larry, go ahead and remind us what the group's supposed to do for us.
Okay, I will be relatively brief here. So this is straight from the charter for the working group. Let's look at the number, condition, use of RA facilities, pools, tennis, pickleball, etc. One that we're already talking about here tonight, review the long-term operational maintenance and capital costs for RA facilities. We have a work in progress spreadsheet that is looking at and right now it's got pools and tennis in it. We're trying to populate it for ball fields and some of the other smaller cost facilities. It's looking at the totality of what is the reserve study, and we can certainly make adjustments to this, per Dave's cost about, what do we anticipate those real costs being. But for right now, we put it together with the reserve study recommendations for the next 5 years and 10 years, in addition to the operating costs for those facilities over the next 5 and 10 years. And when you look at that aggregated cost of capital and operating for all those pools and tennis courts, it's a very, very large number. And so we're going to be diving into that a little later, and perhaps we can talk about that next week. The other thing we want to do is encourage member participation and solicit member feedback. We talked about this at our last meeting. We've had about 6 meetings so far, meeting pretty much every 2 weeks. And right now, if you want to go to the next slide. So these are the questions we're trying to answer. But what I want to say before I kind of walk through these is the last couple of meetings, the working group has been really focused on evaluation criteria. In other words, what they want to create, and I know we've got some of the members on the call here tonight, is an agreed upon, understandable, usable, repeatable process for evaluating facilities. And that's looking at things like community need, equity, geographic, social, etc., and then the financial piece. And those are kind of the main components right now. And so we're hoping to land that plane here, I would hope after the next meeting or two. So I think that's going to be a really important part. And we want that to get out to the community. So the community understands these are the important things that not only the working group, but the board, other committees, and the community should be considering when we look at the number of facilities, the types of facilities, and so forth. And all of that is really to get to in an attempt to answer these questions. Are we providing the appropriate types of facilities, the appropriate number? I know there's been some recent email about, you know, we are, other than perhaps Columbia, Maryland, which has, I think, more pools and tennis courts than we would ever think about having. We have a lot of facilities for a 60,000 person population. What facilities would the community value as part of RA's operations? What are we not doing? And what do we not have that would bring value? Perhaps greater value than one of our existing assets. And those are important questions where we need a lot of community input on that. We're looking at what other providers are doing, you know, looking down the pike for Park Authority, the Regional Park Authority, private developers for that matter. And then a really important question that many people here tonight have touched on, you know, what numbers and types of facilities are sustainable over the coming years? I mean, that's really the focus of the discussion tonight. And the working group, you know, I think we're all hopeful that we're going to get to, you know, some answers for some of these questions that we can provide the board and community, and to help provide some guidance on these very subjects. And so I encourage people to, you know, participate, join those meetings. You know, there's member comments at the beginning of like all of our meetings, and you know, we're trying to get the word out there.
And I do know that there's plans by the working group to reach out to the community for input and insight as well as they work through this decision process and the decision criteria to help guide what the board will be faced with in the coming year. So it's a work in progress, but they're doing great, and I appreciate that, Larry.
So one thing that I've seen, I'm sorry, do I need to, I'm sorry, I'll raise my hand.
Go ahead, Lisa.
One thing, you know, in some of these conversations, and again, that I'm new, that I've been sitting in on, that I think would be really helpful to bring into the conversation is what is the operational use case or continuance case for a recreational facility. And so I know pools are the hot topic, so I'm just gonna bring up pools for a second here. When I think about who are the key users of pools, right? Like just in numbers, the sheer volume of types of users that show up to the pools on a regular basis. We've got camps, swim teams, teenagers, families are the highest volume of users that I've seen. I don't have any data on this, but from my observation, those are the highest volume of people clicking their tickets and entering the pools on a daily basis. And so when we're looking at making a large capital financial decision about a pool like Lake Thoreau, I just haven't seen the data points where it's like, how does it impact those groups of people that have significant high volume usage of the pools? So like with all of the Lake Thoreau analysis that is coming later and whatnot, I just haven't seen that business plan or operational use case. Maybe it's there and it just hasn't been presented, but I think that's an important number when we're thinking about this group and financial impact, because that's how you make value-based decisions. It's balancing the use case and the finances together, and then you have a good value-based decision matrix.
I think we do agree with you, Lisa, and that's part and parcel why the recreational facilities working group was put in place. That's part and parcel why we're going through this exercise tonight. And you know, Lake Thoreau kind of gets to be a poster child before we're quite there yet. So, you know, a little bit of the cart before the horse, but that's just the way it is. timing. So let's go ahead and look at that poster child. I think that's next on the topic tonight. Unless somebody else had another question on the facilities working group. No, okay. So who's doing this one? Larry and Chris. Did I miss a hand? I don't have my big view anymore. Okay.
Yeah, Julie, it was me. I just have one quick point to add to, I think, Lisa's statement. Larry, I think we're looking at usage numbers, it would be helpful.
Sarah, it would be helpful to.
I can't hear.
No.
No.
But if you look at it, the capacity of Lake Newport is like 3 times that of
Sarah, we did not hear you.
Yeah, you cut out when you started to say it would be helpful. We lost you. So
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I had a brief conversation with Tom, and he was kind of surprised when I brought up Lake Newport being in the bottom 4 when it comes to usage, because we're looking at them as just total numbers versus a percentage of usage, because Lake Newport has 3 times the capacity of Shadowwood.
If you were looking at that usage chart, and if you went down to the notes on the 3rd slide of that deck that was sent out, there were major errors in the pass scanning, the first 2 years of pass scanning. So we know the Lake Newport use in 19 and 18, you need to add about 10,000 people to that 4,000 to get to those numbers. You're on mute.
Thank you. That helps.
Yeah, yes, we recognize that. I asked Laura that as soon as I had that sent to me. I said, something's wrong here. So that was their best estimate. It's consistent with the fairly steady long-term trend with Lake Newport.
Right.
Yeah, I actually have the average usage of the pools in front of me, and Lake Newport is 2nd out of 15 of our 15 pools in inventory. They're number 2, Glade's number 1.
Does that include like camps and swim team, which don't scan for entrance?
Now, this is just, it's open visits.
So this was just pools.
Yeah. So but I think, when we're looking at value-based decisions, those camps are members. Like most of camps is membership.
Right.
And most of swim team is membership, and that's hundreds of usages going into different pools. That is not funded.
And our staff have a handle on, those programmatic aspects, but we wanted to get, just kind of the raw, open, because programming we do, and that draws people to the various pools, whether it's groups or rentals or whatever. And what we want to do is at least get in front of the working group, because we had it very handy, is simply when the pool is open for open swim, how attractive is it to people coming in, whether it's from their neighborhood or somewhere across the community, to come to that pool to swim?
You're missing thousands then of usage, because you're not counting the programs that are integral to Reston Association. Like those programs, those 2 programs alone, swim team and summer camp, serves hundreds of visits a day in the summer to certain pools. So like if Lake Thorough was a swim team designated pool and it was being used every single day for 4 weeks by 100 kids, that would maybe make people's decision be different on whether it was the right value to spend the money on that. I mean, those 2 programs alone are hundreds and hundreds of members.
Okay, so it sounds like that's a data point that we need to make sure gets into the analysis part for the recreational facilities folks, as well as we continue, there will be some joint meetings between those 2 groups. So I think you're bringing up some good points, Lisa. Keeping a little bit on track here, let's go to Lake Thorough.
Okay, So, pardon me. Kind of touching on the current status where we are with the project. So this is a look at the project life cycle. You guys have probably seen this before. It outlines the typical process for a major project for Reston Association, from initiation, planning, scoping, design architecture, estimation, implementation, and evaluation. And so right now we're just before that KDP 1, or the key decision point 1. And so kind of getting into Lake Throw, and I've shown this slide before, concept 1 has been generally accepted by the community. Before we move into KDP, 1 for design architecture engineering, it requires board authorization. It's not going to be officially included within the capital budget until, the board gives that approval to move forward. So I want to give a little bit of background on Lake Throw in terms of how it fits within the reserve study. So Lake Throw Pool had a total of 35 capitalized assets and allowances according to the 19 study. And that one-time estimated replacement cost of all of those capitalized assets is $2.23 million. And the 30-year replacement cost is 2.56. That's accounted for, inflation of like 2.77%, as well as reoccurring replacements of certain assets that happen multiple times over a 30-year period, such as white coats, floor coatings, and deck equipment. So those estimated costs, and like I mentioned before, assume the following of an exact like-for-like replacement. Marginal soft costs are just small ones that might be associated with their like-for-like replacements, a steady rate of inflation at 2.77%, and an industry standard life expectancy. So keep in mind, facilities like Ridge Heights have a very short life expectancy on their white coat compared to what the industry standard is, which is about 7 to 10 years. And many times we try to tweak those to be tailored to the site that they're located at. We did a lot of that as part of this last reserve study, but a lot of the times we just have to kind of base it upon what is the industry average, and that's what we go with. And so if we ever run into a situation where it's a lot shorter than that, it changes our funding model. But also on the flip side, we've had instances where they've lasted a lot longer than what they said they were going to. And so in those situations, we push those out until they are time to be due, because we're not just going to replace it for the sake of replacing it. So getting into the Lake Throw Pool funding background, just to kind of clear up some things. So in 2021, the budget for Lake Throw focused only on repairs and replacements that were required to get the facility back in operation. And so those were repairs that had to do with anything with the exterior retaining wall and the pool shell. And so this image you see to the right are all the highlighted areas that would likely be impacted by addressing those items, except for the roof and electrical repairs, but those were already pre-scheduled at that facility. So you see all that red, which is the exterior retaining wall. All the blue would signify all the concrete decking or even the spa area that have to be redone. You also see a little bit of that grass beach area. The main pool would have some work to have to be done, of course, to address those cracking issues and all the plaster problems we have there as well. So that estimated cost for those items was $1.4 million. And so that's where that initial number came from when this discussion first started. But again, it was only to address the bare minimum to get it back to what it needed to be. However, pardon?
I'm sorry, Chris, can I ask a question?
Sure.
So I understand what you mean by, just getting it back in operation, but does that number include meeting all zoning requirements and ADA requirements?
No.
So we had a number that really we would never have done. I mean, we weren't going to do work that wasn't within zoning requirements, right? I mean,
you'd have to get a building permit when you start disturbing this much area. And if you mess with a retaining wall that's over 3 feet, you have to get a building permit. And so this was really a trigger to say, hey, we've got a lot of things we're going to have to address with this site. It's going to cost a lot of money to just even get it back like for like. And odds are it's going to potentially be more than this, because we're going to have to do things with ADA. And then we ran into details regarding it being in a resource protection area. And so the board decision back in 2020 was, we need to look at this more holistically, because it doesn't make any sense to just do a bunch of these repairs for almost half the value of the facility. We need to look at this a bit more holistically.
but we wouldn't have done it. I mean, well, let's keep going. I don't want to, right. It's not something we would have done. It sounds like it's not enough to do the project, but okay, I understand.
So moving into the funding planning options, I think I can take a few of these for you, Hank, if you want.
Yeah, well, once you go ahead, now I'll finish up with what we think are the decision points, the options going forward.
So this is another familiar slide, I'm sure. So this is the rough order magnitude costs that were generated by Kimley Horn as well as other pool industry experts who've done a lot of work in this region. And from the conceptual designs that were created from the community input, you're looking at it between a $2.9 and $3.5 million for concept 1 and 3.8 to 4.5 for concept 2. Now, both of these facilities bring them up to ADA code. And they both account for a 25% contingency within each of them. But because of the amount of grading and work you'd have to do to the site for concept 2 is why it's so much more expensive. And at this point, trying to get these costs any narrower is just not really possible until we have more engineering done, so we can actually focus in on the exact requirements we would have to fulfill. Right now, we're just basing it upon visual observations and some really basic data that you can get before you actually do a full-fledged field survey and analysis of it.
Right, because this is conceptual stage.
Correct.
Design, architect, and engineering stage.
Yeah. So Hank, you want to take it from here?
I'm sorry, am I up?
Like, yeah, if you want to come in this.
Yes.
I can't hear.
I think.
Yeah, if you'd like,
you're up.
You're up.
Oh, okay. Well, let's just basically we are looking at, for the Lake Thoreau pool, we were looking at funding for phase what was considered concept 1, and we were looking at splitting the costs as we. Maybe it might be easier if we go to the next slide, to be perfectly honest with you. And yes, the basically we were allocated $350,000 last year in the 2019 process for the 2020 budget. We're allocated $350,000 to initiate the study and determine what it was going to take to fund what was involved with the issues with Lake Thoreau pool and what was going to take to fund it. Kimley Horn did that, and that's where the plan and the basic analysis of where we are right now came from. We have not spent nearly, I think, Chris, it's less than $100,000 we've spent on getting the initial study done, which indicates the ADA issues, the parking lot issues, the retaining wall issues, and they've come back with what they believe the project's going to cost. We've also then looked at, we've gotten the input from the community, and there's been a lot of strong input from the Lake Thoreau community that this pool is indeed important and valued by the community. We've looked at the usage, and we do have 15 pools in our system. And Lake Thoreau pool right now, just by the usage numbers that we have, is averaging six most used out of our 15 pool system. And also the development of the pool, so it's used a lot compared to the other pools in our system. And as we've discussed the improvements to Lake Thoreau, we've also discovered that we actually can do it in a way that would give more of our community access to the actual lake. So our recommendation is to look at moving forward with a Lake Thoreau project. We basically have, we have $350,000. It's already been allocated. The project's going to cost roughly 3.4 million. We're suggesting that we could fund this with our existing capital without raising assessments if you budget it in 2 separate cycles. One would be in 2021 for 1.6 million, and the second cycle would be in 2022 for 1.5 million. The way we've been able to look at this and make it work is I've asked Chris and Larry to take a look at the capital, the planned capital expenditures for 2021 and 2022, and determine if there was anything that's on that list that could be moved later out or postponed for a couple of years. And they've gone and done that work and come back and said, yes, there are. And so consequently, we do believe that because the pool has very high, in our system, very high visitorship, the community is very much behind it, and any new improvements we make to the whole complex would make access to Lake Thoreau more accessible to the entire community. We think we should move forward with it by splitting the cost over the next 2 capital budget cycles. We also believe that what we really need to do going forward is allow the Recreation Facilities Working Group to do their job, to do their work, and complete their investigation, their evaluation, and reach their conclusions, and ultimately give us recommendations on all the facilities that they're looking at. I mean, they're literally asking questions like, for our population, do we need 15 swimming pools? Are there opportunities that we're missing by focusing entirely on swimming pools and tennis courts that might be a new amenity that we should be able to add or could potentially add and attract additional membership to the association? So our 2 recommendations are basically move forward with Lake Thoreau over the next 2 years, and to allow the Recreation Facilities Working Group to do their job, come back with ultimately their recommendations. And in the meantime, have staff work with the fiscal committee on looking and investigating what's being termed intergenerational funding sources or types that could be available to RA in order to address what is going to be a bigger need that the Recreation Facilities Working Group is going to come up with. Whether that be loans, bonds, or other sort of mechanisms that we might be able to create. So those are the three recommendations we have. Move forward with Lake Thoreau Pool, allow the Recreation Facilities Working Group to finish their work, give us their conclusions, and working in parallel with that, can look at sources of funding, and then once we understand ultimately where the board and the community wants to go, and we have some numbers, we can actually start driving how we would fund it. But that's going to take time. And so that's kind of where we are right now. And I'll take any questions, sir.
Can I add one thing, Hank?
Yes.
Before any questions, this kind of gets back to, I think Dave and Bob referenced this earlier. Chris and I, have already, we mentioned this maybe at the last board meeting. I'm trying to remember, but this notion of a 5 and 10 year major capital next plan, using a threshold of, as Chris pointed out earlier, $250,000, because it's the projects that are typically more than that, where you're getting involved with the engineering, county permitting, and all the other things that get tossed at you, and really dig into that over the next, really before the next budget cycle, so that the board and community have a true understanding of what those real costs are. And that will include kind of what Chris and I did to get that aggregated list you just saw, is looking at projects, and we may have to spend a little money to get some evaluation, whether that's engineering or otherwise, and say, look, does this pool really have to be done in 2024, or can it wait until 2026 or something like that? So there's a lot of work to be done in that realm to come up with this 5 and 10 year look ahead that is, a more accurate picture than what we have in front of us right now.
Madam President,
Jim.
Madam President,
I'm sorry, the dogs were barking. Yes, John.
um, I would like to say at the outset that I fully support moving forward with funding Lake Thoreau Pool for its replacement over the next 2 years. I want to comment, so that I fully support. I believe it's high usage. It's really beautiful position right on the lake. Its important role in that community, for me, makes it one of the pools definitely that we want to save, and that we should proceed to do it over the next 2 years. The one thing that I want to expand on a bit is how we fund it. And I've had a chance to talk with Hank and Larry about this, and they believe that what I'm going to propose can't be realized in time to use with Lake Thoreau Pool. But I want to mention it anyway, and Hank has alluded to it. And that is, I think we absolutely need to look at funding large, expensive, and long life facilities through financing rather than through pay-as-you-go. This is standard for local and state governments, and for 2 reasons. One is affordability. They just don't have cash lying around to cash fund, for example, a wastewater treatment plant. So they have to finance it. But the second reason is intergenerational equity. It's not fair that current ratepayers foot the whole bill for a facility that will serve multiple future generations of ratepayers. So there's both an affordability and an intergenerational component to my reason for urging financing. And I distributed to my board colleagues today, unfortunately only this afternoon, a spreadsheet that I did showing the cost per $100,000 borrowed, assuming different terms and different interest rates. Let me give you one example. So let's say we wanted to fund something, $100,000 on a 20-year loan, and we were fortunate enough to get a 4% fixed interest rate. So the spreadsheet I did is a sensitivity study. These are not these are not predictions of what we will get. It's a sensitivity study of what would be the effect of this. So 20-year term, 4% loan. The additional annual assessment per household, and we have 21,230 households. So the additional annual assessment required to service that loan would be 34 cents a year. That's the additional assessment if we finance it. If we paid cash for that same $100,000 asset investment, it would cost an additional $4.71 in additional assessment. So that is obviously you're paying interest costs, but you're spreading it over time and more equitably over time, I would argue. So the difference between 34 cents assessment increase and $4.71 assessment increase is significant. So I thank Hank for saying that you're going to study it, and I hope fiscal will do it. I think it is the only way we're going to be able to responsibly fund the maintenance and improvement on our capital assets. Thank you.
I would be remiss as treasurer of the association not to jump in here and agree that we need to look at alternatives. but let me put this on the table, because we need to understand as of this year where we're starting. So I think everything, all incomes, all income, all revenues and all expenses should be on the table for review, as well as capital projects. Once we have that information, we can then begin to do planning that is much more concrete. And because the vast majority of our revenue is dictated by assessments, and we've kind of driven a stake in the ground that it's going to be similar this year, the expenses are where we have to be absolutely fully assured that we're most effectively spending our members' money. And I would like to have a discussion of the budget, since we were supposed to do this on the 21st with the fiscal committee, so that we have the fiscal committee members are satisfied and understand where we will start at the beginning of 2021, with an eye towards optimizing all expenses and all revenues, and considering the funding of Lake Thoreau Pool. And if that means cutting expenses even significantly, so be it.
Hi, this is Ben.
Yes, Ben, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm happy that the staff and the fellow board members are looking at keeping this as assessment neutral. I would say that move number 1 below number, I thought I was looking at. Okay, so move the fact that you want to spend the money in 2021 and 2022, 1.5 approximately million each year, after the recreational facilities completes their assessment, because that would make sense that you said that you want the recreational facility group to make an assessment. That would mean that they would do a study and recommend on what we should do with Lake Thoreau. I understand you're pressured right now by public opinion, but doesn't mean it's the right thing to do to take up the project right away and spend 3.5 million on it. So I think it is fine if you let the recreational facility group, which is a collection of our members, and I'm sure they'll come at a good decision on what to do with Lake Thoreau. And then we can see how to spend monies for Lake Thoreau. The other thing is, as far as this intergenerational, this fancy term that you came up with, just because we don't know how to balance a budget, or this generation is reckless in its spending, it's just a fancy term for saying that the future generations are going to be left holding the bag, many of whom are not even born right now. And it's just not fair. So that's a bunch of bogus terms. It should be off the table. And just look at balancing the budget and using the monies that we have and live within our means.
Anyone else wish to comment?
I'd like to say a couple things.
Please, David.
Again, I am concerned about discussing capital in a vacuum and not discussing the operating budget. I said that earlier. Our operating margins are dwindling. And one of the things that we're going to have to discuss at some point, if that is a reality, is whether or not, to John's point of borrowing money, are we talking about it as We have a 5-year issue in front of us that we'd like to try to understand, or are we coming up with a new methodology of how we fund ourselves permanently going forward? I mean, there's an important decision to make there. You know, does funding become another way of managing our year-to-year budgets? Or is it a stopgap right now because we've approached an area where we see a great amount of infrastructure needing to be fixed in a very short period of time? An example I'll point out to you is that I think it's the what if 10-year projection, something like 2027, we're going to spend 1.3 million in capital. So there are a lot of other decisions to make around this. I'm not suggesting this as a pro or con Lake Thoreau. That's not my point. Is just we've got to make sure we are looking at everything here and not trying to isolate things, okay? The spending on Lake Thoreau should be put in the budget based on how we're going to spend it, not on how it fits financially. In other words, if the split of 50-50 is the way the money will be spent, to the best of our knowledge, understand things will change, okay? Then that's the way we budget it. If we think it's going to be 2/3, 1/3, then it ought to be budgeted that way. It isn't budgeted for the way we can afford it. It's budgeted for the way we're going to spend it. So, and the other thing I'll just throw out, because we've got to be very cognizant of 2022 in the next few weeks. There is going to be, it looks like there could be as much as, well, probably well more than $1 million of increased operating expense in 2022. On top of maybe who knows how much capital, okay? So it's a greater discussion. Pardon me?
How much, what was the figure you used?
Over $1 million increased operating expense.
Okay.
We are deferring some things right now. Again, I don't want to go down this tonight. This is a capital discussion, but it's important. You got to put these two budgets together when you talk about funding, okay? And to Bob's point and to others, we have to look at that operating budget as well. 2 years ago, we had operating margins of $3.5 million. That's normally well enough to spend on capital to keep us in good shape. Our 2021 original budget that we approved last year had an operating margin of 2.8 million. So we need to be aware of this stuff as we go forward, and hopefully we can get together and talk about some of this stuff in more detail at another time.
Okay. Question, I guess, first, I see you, Sarah. Let me ask my question first. The 50-50, I see that you're saying 1.6, 1.5. To Dave's point, I mean, I realized that maybe it was easiest to do 50-50, but I don't know if you've really spent any significant amount of time thinking about what would we actually incur in the Lake Thoreau project in 2021, as opposed to paying bills in 2022. And I realized that we're crossing over our biennial budget period, where we've got part of it in one 2-year cycle and part of it in another 2-year cycle. But it does make sense to me, as you say, to budget as best we can to anticipate what those costs are.
It would be pretty close, and Chris and Larry certainly can help me with this. But I mean, what's going to happen next is you have to go get into the detailed construction documents. Then you have to do the environmental impact study and all those things. They kind of work together. You then would bid the project, get the permitting of the project, and move forward with demolition. And that probably would take the better part of next year, if not all of next year, before you went into the weather. Additionally, materials right now, the construction trade and getting the materials is not what it used to be. It's a lot slower. So you'd spend more than likely the amount of money we've indicated on what I just described. And then the second year, you'd be into the new construction phase, or what might be any renovation phase, where you're doing you're raising the grade of the parking lot, you're doing the wall, that sort of thing. In general, that's where I see this going. So you would agree, would you, Chris, or you see it that way?
Yes. Yeah, we sat down and kind of projected out a timeline, assuming that a decision is made to move forward, with this budget cycle. And, that's where it came out.
Okay, so I had the second part of my question. I know part of tonight was talking about different means by which we would pay for something. And my thought process goes, okay, so if we said, let's go ahead and for the money that we need in 2021, we take it out of our normal sources that we would look to for major projects, so we pull that out of that fund. But that next year's money, the 2022, as we look at that in concert with other potential infrastructure costs that we know are coming down the road. Chris, you didn't necessarily put the years into these upcoming projects, but I know that some are in the 2-3 year cycle, some are 5, but those all factor into how we look at how we pay, whether it's financing reserves, whatever. So is it possible for the purposes of the 2021 budget that we as a board could say, yes, go forward with Lake Thoreau Pool. We're going to approach the cost of 2021 by doing this. And I know it's a bit of kicking the can down the road in terms of how you get the 2022 money, but we're not in the budget cycle where we can make those decisions on 2022 budget.
If I can respond to that, Julie,
that makes sense. I don't know if I made sense, but.
Well, no, I think I understand what you stated there. When we get into, once we get into bidding, so we go through the architecture, engineering, permitting, surveying, stakeout, demolition. So when you get to the really the construction, stakeout, and demolition piece, you've got a general contractor under contract to do the project.
Right.
That being in 2021. I doubt a general contractor would sign up with us to say, well, I'll do the demolition, and then we have to wait for a second commitment to carry through with the rest of the project. And so I think they're just,
that's not my question. My question was more about, obviously in my mind, if we go forward, if we commit to doing the pool, we're committing to doing the pool, the whole thing. My question was, can we commit to doing the pool without having an absolute knowledge of how we're funding what we perceive we will need in 2022? It's the method of finance. Can I make a yes today using my normal process, knowing that my 2022 source of funding is to be determined? I mean, one way or the other, we're going to cover it. The question is how.
Yes.
Dave.
The answer is yes.
The answer is yes. Sarah.
I need something for 22, but can we do 21? I think with what staff has put out, what Chris has got for capital, what I've looked at, with a few tweaks in the next few weeks, there's no reason why those numbers can't work for 21.
Okay.
There's a big nut to crack for 22.
Right, which is kind of goes into buying us some more time to continue this discussion about how we modify our past practices to reflect our current and future needs, as well as hopefully we'll get more insight, from what we're tasking the Recreational Facilities Working Group in terms of decision criteria process and filling needs. And Sarah, I know you had your hand up. Do you still wish to speak?
Yes, I do. Just
Okay,
turned off my video.
After that.
I have a quick question for Chris or Larry. When we initially got our bill for the 708, I know you guys had a breakdown on how much of the 708 goes towards reserves. Do you happen to have that number on you? Like how much of my member dues are set aside for reserves? You had a nice dollar bill kind of graphic with the breakdown.
I'm trying to get my calculator out here. Maybe if Tom Deal's on, he can probably answer.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to look for that demographics. If you all continue on, I'll see if I can find it.
Thanks.
Sure. So the related question is, we've already sort of done intergenerational funding. We've been setting aside money in reserves. So if we're going down the lending route, then, you know, are we double billing? Am I getting, you know, tagged on both sides?
You will only be, in my opinion, we will only be double billed if you continue kind of willy-nilly increasing the assessments and at the same time borrow. If we establish concretely our starting point and notify the members, this is what we plan to do, we will at least be, you know, have an honest discussion and a starting point from which to work. So that's why I'm talking, that's why I'm really driving on locking down the budget very firmly this year. The biennial construct is more a formality than a reality, because the changes, the repairs and the renovations occur when they need to occur, and irrespective of whether it's in one budget or another. So it's not, I don't think it's that germane. We have to deal with it because it's part of the process. But the reality is, if we're going to start the project, you as Larry pointed out, nobody's going to be willing to dig a hole and then say, well, we've decided not to do the project. We're going to back away from it. And if we think we have problems with communication with members, just that would be disastrous.
Lisa, you wanted to ask?
Just one,
Yeah,
Julie, let me just close off, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were done. So,
If we get that number, that'd be great. And there's no question if we're going to replace Lake Throw Pool. I think we've established that. My only disappointment is we're not looking at anything operational. It will be nice if there was some cuts and the operational budget was super tight, and then we explored lending and bonds and any of those. That's it.
okay, Lisa, unmute yourself first, though.
Thank you. Julie, I didn't understand your question that you asked that that David answered. Was your question, can we approve the pool to move forward with Lake Thorough Pool as part of the 2021 budget without knowing how we're going to fund it? Was that your question?
No.
Oh, okay, I misunderstood.
Okay, so you want to try, David?
Well, right, I didn't answer yes to that, certainly.
So we first,
yeah, we have a budget draft right now that has revenue and expense that will drive an operating margin of almost over 3.2 million. And the funding that is being asked for next year is 3.4 million. So I'm saying, hey, is a $200,000 gap? We can find that, we can fix that for the year of 21. Again, this is all assuming a 708 rate, which as a financial person, I don't support, but I understand why we're doing it. But I think we can make it happen because we've got to close 200,000 somewhere. Okay, but that's only for 1 year. Okay,
But
we
my,
have to find ways to pay for 22, which will be the rest of the pool. But again, as the comment was made earlier, we're not approving half the pool. Okay,
Right.
it either goes or doesn't go. It doesn't go
Right.
half.
right, but what I was suggesting was that from what staff has presented, they are suggesting that we go ahead and use money from our normal source, right, the allocation. And my only question is, since all we must do in the 2021 budget, which we will see a new draft on the 22nd of October, we will have a public hearing on November, I think it's 5th, and then we vote on it November 19th, I think it is, which establishes the 2021 budget, operating expenses, et cetera, and the assessment rate. So my question was, we need to give guidance to staff as to what to do with the Lake Thoreau pool. It was left out of the 2021 budget that we looked at in September, but it was listed as a separate line item. So either we have to say, yes, go ahead and put that back in for X amount and take it from that fund, and we'll figure out the second 1.5, whether or not we take that again out of the normal process, or if we say we ought to explore other ways of paying for it along with that.
So my only caution on that, right, would be, well, yes, you can do that, right? We're then handcuffing ourselves, right? Once we make a decision, so this recreational group is a really important service to the members of analyzing all of our recreational facilities. If we make a decision to move forward with Lake Thoreau now, without the results of what that group's work is, we're really handcuffing ourselves on our ability to enact on the plans that might come out of that group later, because there just won't be enough money left to do it. No matter what the funding source is, there's going to be a point where it just doesn't make sense to spend the money. So I just say, well, we can do that and you can make that decision now. We're really going to handcuff the results of the recreational committee probably at a future date. And so it's just making the decision, understanding that it is probably going to happen later.
Okay, the recreational facilities working group is focused on both a process and decision criteria to help guide future decisions. They are not being asked to vote yay or nay on Lake Thoreau pool.
But I would think that one of those criteria and decision things, as I was trying to talk about earlier, is really related into looking at all the pool assets together, right? And not just looking at Lake Thoreau pool. So if you look at all the assets together and everyone agrees the association needs to provide pool services to members, I don't think anyone is doubting that whatsoever. But if we're looking at the criteria around the pool assets, right? So we can come up with this criteria and we're just not sure without knowing what it is, whether Lake Thoreau is going to fall into that, especially when we haven't looked at the pools and the contents we're missing hundreds of daily use cases based on, what we talked about earlier, swim team and camps and whatnot. So I'm just saying that the potential of making this decision now really will limit our ability to enact on different things at a future date.
Understood. Sarah?
So Lisa, I get where you're coming from. Can you hear me?
Yes.
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 I completely get where you're coming from, but Lake Thoreau has been a discussion for many years now. So my suggestion, and Julie, you asked, what do we want staff to do, or what are we asking staff to do? I'm going to be controversial here and throw a motion out there to see if any of my board members will support. Can we ask staff to explore a 7% cut across the operational budget on all line items, not a holistic cut, but on literally every line item? And we're just saying explore a 7% cut. Bob, you're the money guy. I don't know if If that makes sense, can I make that motion? What do you think?
Can we get some more comments before we move into any motions, if you don't mind, Sarah? I think
No, can we?
a couple hands up. I think Mike was next.
Yeah, well, I did have something next, but Sarah put a motion on the floor. I think we either need to have a second or not a second before we can discuss it any further.
I agree with Mike.
Yeah.
But she asked if she could make a motion, so go ahead.
Oh,
Sarah.
well, okay, then someone could, if someone could tell her.
I
if
made a
someone
motion.
could tell her.
Okay, make your motion.
She did.
Thanks, Mike.
You would like the board, that you would like staff to explore a 7% cut across the board on all of our current line items on 2021 budget is. I have it correct?
Tony, and I'd like to ask Tony if that motion is in order.
So I think this is a budget discussion. And while we are exploring capital, I don't.
Okay.
So do we have a second?
I second it. I want to really explore tightening the budget. I'm going to throw that stake in the ground. So let's see what we can do.
Could you repeat what you just said, Bob? You second.
I second the motion. I think it is a worthy exercise.
Is there any discussion? John?
I will not be supporting that motion. And the reason I won't be supporting it is that I do not believe in budgeting by abstract numbers, whether abstract number increases or abstract number reductions. To me, budgets are policies that have to do with the services we provide. And unless we're prepared to say we're going to cut certain services, then I would not support a motion just to cut by a numerical choice like 7%. Now, we have directed Hank, it's part of his annual work plan, to look for ways to economize, to save money. And we will evaluate him on that. When we discussed his annual work plan with him, he understood exactly what we were talking about. And I believe between the first version of the operating budget we got and the current version, there's significant cuts. So that's why, and I'm not going to second guess that. So I will be voting against the motion.
Anyone else?
This is Van.
Yes, Ben?
Yeah, so this is why we are here today, because through all the years, all we've done, and those before us, is recklessly just spend. That's the only way we've handled the budget. And because of that fiscal irresponsibility time and time again, today, in spite of bringing in $18 million a year, we are unable to find $3.5 million to fix a pool, because what you just said about services to provide to the members, we are unable to provide the services because there's a lot of this spending that goes on. What Sarah is saying, the operational budget, I'd said this previously, out of $18 million, and it increases every year, so whatever the current numbers are, but we bring in $18 million, we were putting away $3 million for reserve funds, and out of the $15 million, more than half was going towards payroll, and the other half was going towards operations, many of which do not bring in revenue to support the costs. And even in the past year, we've talked about programs, we've talked about how we are going to conduct retail type of events, and there was always a push for getting these events go live without actually doing a cost benefit assessment. And I'm sure they would grow into a money pit and consume monies. But all of that is okay, because all we can do is always we can assess our members, because if that's why I think it is important that to qualify to be on the board, maybe you should have either run your company or bet your own money on stake, in order to know that if you continue to make wrong moves, you'll one day lose the shirt that you're wearing. But in this case, we've learned over multiple generations of the board that we can always assess the members. Well, as per the deed, they don't have anywhere to go. They have to pay the assessments. But that's fiscal responsibility, is to not look at cutting down spending and to always keep on spending.
Mike? Your mute button.
Okay, sorry about that. Kept pushing and wasn't going. Good. Well, I'll be voting against this motion. I don't think it's a good use of staff's time to go through an exercise of making across the board cuts. Just because across the board cuts, any public budgeter will tell you is a terrible way to make cuts. It's a terrible way to budget. You'll end up cutting some programs too much, and you'll cut other things not enough. Maybe they could have been 10. Maybe something should have been 2. Why make it 7? Why make it 6? It's just, maybe you do that in an emergency, but you don't do it probably even for a business too. That's it.
Like, the only reason I suggested across the board is historically in RA, especially you can look at the cuts, we've continuously asked Hank to cut the operational budget. And every time it comes back with cuts that actually affect the members. He has a padded staff payroll of over $9 million. We have a non-assessment revenue person. We had 0 non-assessment revenue last year. I'm not saying fire people, but I'm saying you need to restructure. You need to be responsible. You
right,
have.
Sarah, but cutting a 7% across the board doesn't even solve that problem necessarily. And 2, it's just not a smart way to go about it. Go after the things that if you think we're overspending on stuff, I respect your opinion on that. Go after those things. Don't say, let's take 7% out of pools. Let's take 7% out of camps. Let's take 7% out of this thing. Go for what
The suggestion was just to explore. It wasn't take everything out. It was just to push staff to explore.
Fair enough. You're right. We're not talking about the actual budget here. We're talking about the request for information from staff. And personally, I don't think it's a good use of their time. That's it.
No worries.
Karen,
Mooney,
Sarah, allow Karen a chance to speak.
I will also be voting against this. I think, given that, what we're dealing with the Lake Thoreau pool, what we've dealt with COVID all year, I am sure that Hank and staff have looked at the operational expenses with a microscope and have cut wherever they think is possible. Now, we can discuss this more next week and in November, but I will be voting against this.
All right. I would like to make a few comments.
can I have a quick question for John before we go into your questions?
Sure.
All right. I was hoping,
John, you were
yes, but go ahead.
With the county before. Can you tell me what was your demographic or strength? Like, our membership is 60,000. What was Arlington County, like an approximate?
Arlington County at that time was about, when I worked there, was about 200,000.
And do you know how much we spent on, for example, communications? How much you spent on communications?
I do not.
Sarah, I'm sorry to interrupt, but are we going to get into a discussion of the operational budget in a working group on capital planning?
Mike, I made a motion. We're just having a discussion. I just had a question. I know we have a difference of opinion, but I think I'm allowed to ask a question, so I'm sorry.
You are, but please respect that this is not a meeting for the subject that you're talking about. It's the second time you've tried to take over a meeting on your pet project. So come on.
Mike, I think those were uncalled for comments. So, I know your time is important and you barely made it. I'm at the beach. I've been at RA meetings all week, all day, every day this week.
Interrupt both of you.
We have,
And
we have time.
stop the back and forth.
Julie, just
there.
call a vote. I don't think we have the support, but I've made my point.
Sarah, I left you, asked your question. I would like to speak with some of the thoughts that I have as well. I also will be voting against this. At the last board meeting.
Made a statement. I just want to clarify. This is not my pet project.
All right.
Can we please be clear? Because I don't live near Lake Thoreau.
So noted.
Point of order, could we proceed with the business at hand, please?
I just wanted to apologize. Poor choice of words. I'm sorry, Sarah. You're right.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay, so back to me. In the last board meeting, the September 24th, there was a remark made about whether or not we could look at, could we possibly pare down some things, whether it was 300,000 or whatever. It was not a motion, but Hank and staff did take that request, if you will, and they did spend time on it. And I believe so far they have not found where even 300,000 could be pared out of the operational budget as it stands. I know that as far as our personnel issue is concerned, we did the Archer report. It's available for people to look at. The board voted in, the previous board did vote to go ahead and put in place the compensation changes to bring our personnel into a more competitive range against what is out there in the marketplace. We have asked our staff to bear with us and live without the additional contributions that were to be made in the 2021 budget to bring about 40% of the staff yet up to competitive rates. So I do want folks to understand that the issue of personnel and compensation has been studied by a consultant and has been addressed by a previous board in terms of fair compensation to our staff. Those are two statements that I wanted to make. This discussion, as Mike pointed out, was focused on capital projects and capital funding activities. So the key decision we had in terms of what do we want staff to do with the 2021 budget is still out there. Bob.
I am for the motion because I want to be confident that we have as tight as expenses as we possibly can. We are moving into a difficult period. And to know where we start, we have, this whole issue is made even more complicated because each year we have a different composition to the board. And in the last couple of years, before I got onto the board, we are dealing with substantially the same level of detail. It's not sufficient. If we can get to that level of detail, that level of comfort, so that members understand that the board has done its due diligence and it proves that we even have to spend more money in order to provide the services, so be it. But that's the starting point. And if we don't at least take an effort to look very carefully at expenses, I think we're remiss.
Okay. I do believe that we've been dealing with some of these questions since mid-August when we had one of our working sessions, and we've looked at some things. I know that some questions have been asked for more details on specific cost centers. If those have not been seen or shared with all of the board members, I apologize. I just don't recall if they all had gotten into a general Dropbox, but so I know there were 2 areas that had been specifically asked for more details on. John.
I just want to make one quick comment.
Can we call the vote?
It's not as though previous members or members of the board prior to this year, myself included, and Karen and Julie, have been unconcerned about this. One of the first tasks that we gave Hank, and I said it once, I'll say it again, when he arrived in January 2019, was to right-size staff.
Right.
And one of the things that we encountered were complaints from citizens, from our members, first of all, but then from the DRB, that our service in covenants and serving the DRB was substandard because we didn't have enough staff. We encountered the same complaints about communications. We encountered the same complaints about IT. And Hank did all he could to rejigger staff back and forth. This was in 2019, before some of my newer colleagues came aboard, but I want to assure you that we drilled down and had very careful talks, but it was very clear that Hank did not fill some positions that I personally felt should have been filled. But he did that because he reassigned those FTE slots to the key neuralgic areas of DRB and covenants, IT, and what else did I say? The third, IT, covenants, and
Communications.
Communications. And I think we've begun to see improvements in all 3 areas. I do not want, the drilling down really did happen. It started, I just looked at the notes. In October 2018, we started talking about this and saying what we were going to do when we got the new manager. We had, in our October meeting 2018, a long discussion that we were going to do. We're going to make sure that the comp plan was properly funded, not overfunded, but properly funded, so that we could compete with our employer competitors in this area. And we wanted to do a staffing study to make sure we were right-sized and that we had the right resourced employees in the right area. I believe Hank has done a very good job in it, and he's really reassigned people where possible. So I really oppose I am saddened by the impression that previous boards have not looked into this, especially in the personnel area. I think we lost 25% of our personnel in 2018 for a variety of reasons, but we board members joked among ourselves, are we going to have to man the help desk? We were losing so many people. So I applaud what our employees have done, and I applaud Hank for the way he has reassigned and tried to right balance the workforce in the places they need to be.
Thank you, John. I believe that all board members have had a bite at the apple on this particular motion that Sarah has made. So
Julie, can I just start and make a closing comment? I know you're going to call a vote. That's
I'm
okay.
calling a vote.
I'd just like to make a quick. Can I make a quick closing comment?
Fine. Go ahead.
I don't know how this turned into Sarah wants to fire everybody, but payroll is the biggest line item on our budget, and hence we started there as an example. I'm not saying the staff is unnecessary. We have to let people go. I just have a question for Hank. We hired a person for non-assessment revenue. Can you tell us how much, or ballpark, what we pay and how much non-assessment revenue we've made? And the reason this is related to today's topic, because we were talking about ways to fund capital projects like Lake Thoreau Pool. We need to get our priorities straight, hence the question.
Hank, do not answer that question. Folks, as an individual personnel matter, she does not qualify as one of the top, it's either 7 or 9 employees that we're required to disclose by law.
Okay, Tony, let me rephrase my question.
I think
Can we get how much
the question.
raised in non-assessment revenue last year? Can Hank answer how much we raised in non-assessment revenue?
Absolutely, that's fine. We just can't.
Okay, okay, just not the staff.
That's
That's okay.
executive session.
So let me rephrase my question, Hank. Can you tell us how much we raised in non-assessment revenue?
In 2020,
Yes,
on
please.
average, we raise about 20% of our revenue that way. And this year, we've raised a little over $1 million in total non-assessment revenue. The individual that we're talking about, we were actually brought an individual on board to help develop non-assessment revenue and ways to make that happen. COVID-19 hit. None of us knows, I don't know about anybody else that I'm looking at on the screen that can actually predict when COVID-19 was going to hit and when it was going to end. The individuals, we are still trying to continue to have relationships with both the corporations, the individuals, and the other folks that have been involved with helping us with non-assessment revenue in the past, so that we continue to have that relationship, because COVID-19 is not going to be here forever. And it's just not. So it's like maintaining your sales force. So we want to make sure that we're in a position to continue to grow non-assessment revenue, because the truth is there's the revenue that comes into Rest Association right now in the near term. You have 2 sources of it. You have assessments and you have non-assessment revenue. And you're not growing assessments because we're not building any new homes or houses or in the Reston area. So the only way you can grow that revenue, as you've all pointed out so far, and we all agree, is to raise assessments, which we're all reluctant to do. So how do you grow the revenue that Reston needs to operate and fund capital? Non-assessments. And we need to look at it in a creative way. And that's actually what was part of what I was recruited to do when I was hired. Now, if the board wants to change that initiative and wants to change that mandate, we certainly can do it. We can readjust and reorganize the how we operate. But that is the operating structure we're under right now. That's the strategic plan we're operating under right now. And we have indeed cut costs. And you're going to see that we have a balanced budget right now. We're not running a deficit. And when we finish the end of the year, we will not have run a deficit. So, but the number of selecting the number 7% is an arbitrary number. I'm not sure why you selected 7%, but if the board asked me to cut across the board, that means literally every line item, every department to cut 7%, we will go and do that exercise and cut 7%. But that's really an arbitrary number.
Okay.
It was just
So
exploratory. And the number was because of that's what you need for Lake Thoreau, just what's right here, right now. But thank you. I think we've taken up so much time on this.
Everyone's had a bite at the apple from our board directors. I'm going to call the question. Does anyone need me to repeat the motion?
No, I think we can just call a vote.
So all in favor of the motion from Sarah and seconded by Bob. Can I see a show of hands in favor of that? I see Bob's, I see Sarah's. Anyone else?
Then says aye.
Okay. 3 ayes. Votes against. May I see the votes for that? John, Julie, Karen, and Mike. There's only 7 members here tonight, so 4 beats 3, and the motion fails. I need a motion to extend the meeting adjournment time. We are currently scheduled to adjourn at 9:15. It is 9:08, so we still have either action on a recommendation for the 2021 budget line item for Lake Thoreau Pool, and we also have an executive session on a contractual matter. So I would like to make a motion to extend the meeting to 10 o'clock.
So move.
Second,
Okay, so move. Second, everyone in favor of that? Can I have ayes?
aye.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
Aye from them.
6, and I think Micah will abstain. Or are you saying aye? Okay, aye. All right, so we will go till 10 o'clock. To finish out the piece that has to do with funding and forecasting and the 2021 budget, I believe that, if I remember back where we were, we had a slide on board decision points, and one that the staff was asking was, what shall they do for our 2021 budget that they need to present to us on the 22nd? So I will go ahead and make a motion to fund the Lake Thoreau pool through 2021 and 2022. 2021 with capital budgets and 2022 to be determined. I think I can say it that way. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but, or you can second it for discussion.
Second.
Okay, we have a second, so discussion. Do we wish to give the board, give staff direction on Lake Thoreau line item for the 2021 budget?
We are assuming then that concept one is the design we are going to change.
Basic concept, right? There may be some changes in it from concept to, execution. For example, whether or not, I think someone mentioned, could the observation deck be available in the winter? Someone talked about whether or not we could make some adjustments to the dock area that's associated with that. But in general, yes, the basic concept of one. John?
Julie, I will support the motion, but I'm wondering whether the motion might be improved to say.
I'm sure it could.
Well, to say that we agree that the manager, that the CEO should include Lake Thoreau in the budget to be funded in 2021 and 2022, as stated by staff, with the understanding that the 2022 portion, the funding for the 2022 portion may be changed if a more favorable funding mechanism be found.
Yeah, that's why I was trying to say to be determined, but I was looking at the slide and it spoke to the 2021 capital budget, which kind of goes back to my question of David about, can I say it this way? Can we say, okay, they've recommended that we can go ahead and take part of it now from our normal process, which I think is the capital budgets. And then the second part, which was the 2022 money, we're committing that we will find the money. How and where the money is found is...
My only concern with the way you initially stated it is that whether that might cause concern for a potential bidder.
Okay. I'm willing to get guidance. Tony's always pretty good at helping us.
Something, Julie?
Or David, yes.
I'm not a director, but I need to say something here.
Please.
You're approving them to put it in a draft.
Yes.
The budget is not being approved till November 19th.
Correct.
So I'm not even sure why you need a motion. I mean, you can put anything in a draft as far as I'm concerned. So, but I think we're hung up on thinking that tonight is approving the pool.
How?
On November 19th.
Well,
right.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Hank and Larry, but you needed to know what you were putting in the 2021 budget, right? The source of the funds for 2021.
We needed some direction on whether or not the community wanted us to move forward with Lake Thoreau, the board and the community wanted us to move forward with Lake Thoreau pool or not. That makes a difference in how we would include it in the budget. So that's all we were asking.
Bob?
question. We propose to put into the budget the upper range of this concept. Has the board ever required a cap to be placed on a project?
You mean the upper on the concept one, the 3?
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's been not to exceed on not project of this side. This is the first project of this side I've been involved with, but on smaller ones, there have been not to exceed statements put in, yes.
But because of the nature of this, and I've seen, obviously contracts, have not to exceed, but in this particular case, since it's a large amount of money and we're extending it over 2 years period of time to control the development of it, has the board, Larry, you'd probably be in the best position to provide guidance.
Yeah, we, at this level, I don't recall whether there's been a cap put. It usually comes in the contract piece. It's our hope, quite frankly, that once we get into the actual engineering and design and bid it out, that, we'll do some additional value engineering. Although we don't know all of those elements. Julie referenced a couple of those about, the lake access piece and things like that. But again, there's a fairly substantial contingency in there. And I'm sure as good as Chris is in working with contractors, we certainly like to think that the 2022 ask might be less than what we've, forecast right now.
Thank you.
Mike?
Hi, thanks. Larry and Chris, thanks for the great presentation. It was really good. Would you mind putting up the slides on decision points?
Sure, 1 second.
Thanks.
I was just about to suggest that actually, that something we might want to pull up. Give me 1 moment.
Sure. Well, while you're doing that, my question's going to be about the projects that you were deferring. I understand that it makes sense to do so from a maintenance point of view. But I'm just wondering, what projects are we deferring? We're going to have to pay for them eventually anyway. Why not put them in the budget now?
Well, Chris referenced one of those projects.
Oh, I'm sorry, Chris. It wasn't the KDPs then. It was the, might have been one of the last slides that had the 3 or 4 questions for the board, maybe issues for the board.
Was it?
Was it? Yeah, there you go. That's the one. Thank you.
I think the one before that, Chris, actually shows what's being deferred.
Yeah,
there you go.
That is a breakdown. Yeah, so we've already we pushed Glade tennis further out. Lake Newport tennis, like I mentioned, has been pushed a little bit further out.
Right.
We've Lake Ann Dam has been deferred until the technical review panel has had a decision on that. And we've also pushed seven vehicles that we had originally slated further out, which brings it down about $750,000 million from what the original 2021 draft budget was back in like 2019. I think is what that was.
Got it. Thank you. And thank you for, exercising that level of care to find things that, no, we don't actually have to do this right now, but we are going to have to do them eventually. So I'm wondering why push them out? What's driving them out? Why is it that you felt like you had to move these out of the budget rather than just asking us for the money?
So that was an attempt to maintain it at the 708 level.
Ah, okay. Got it. That's what I missed, that one little piece. Thank you. But I'm sorry, one more thing though, on that score then, we're talking $750,000. So that over 22,000 homes isn't going to add very much to that 708, would it?
Tom has a better calculation than I do.
Right. Yeah, I'm not good at math. Someone else can do that, but I'm not imagining it's very much. David probably get
$35.
There you go, 35. So it's not nothing. It's not nothing. But given that we're going to have to do them eventually anyway, we might as well start paying for them at some point. We're not going to be able to have flat assessments forever. That doesn't work. We won't get any more new pools if we're going to keep doing it that way. Does keeping those projects in the budget cause any problems with our reserve funding system? I guess I'm referring to the minimum balance and things like that. Will keeping them in cause us to dip below a minimum balance, or is that further out?
Being it's over a 10-year period, a lot of these would be, probably only pushed out maybe a couple of years. But you're also going to have the impacts of inflation and cost rise in construction of the weight. So there is definitely a trade-off in doing them later versus now. But this also gives the opportunity for the facilities working group to do a little bit more analysis on some of these other projects, really kind of help drive what we need to do, we would like to see done.
Got it. Okay. All right.
And I think it's important to clarify too, the big one here, the Lake Ann Dam, that is based upon the state, and the state is about to put together a technical advisory panel, which takes minimum 1 year, usually 2 years. It's basically a notice of regulatory intent to look at the dam safety code. So that's a totally comfortable push out right there. We're probably going to see a number like that, I would guess, in 2 years, maybe 3 years again.
Okay, got it. All right. So great. Well, they sound like very reasonable things to do, but we're also doing it for budgetary reasons. And as I understand it, the budgetary reasons we would do it is we don't want to stay under the cap. That's one. But and I don't pretend to understand this very well yet. But the reserve funding system, where we make payments of about on that rolling 10-year average, and we definitely don't allow the minimum balance to go below the minimum balance. Are those factors that drove you to take these particular projects out, or was it strictly the assessment calculation?
Combination of both.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the just to make me feel more comfortable, in 2021 we had some pool fixes and things that we were doing as part of our regular maintenance, and I know we had to push some of the openings back because of COVID and being able to get engineering and then the work done on those. But our normal kind of outlay of keeping our pools up to standard so that we can open them, we're not pushing any of those off, right? Those are still in our budget.
Correct. Yeah. There's actually an example you'd see in swimming pools where Tall Oaks plaster has actually been added to the budget when it wasn't before, because we're going to need to address that before we can get it open.
Okay.
You're judging from the condition it's in as of the end of this season.
All right. Good. So we're still discussing my motion. Is there a way for me to tighten up that motion? I think we understand what I was attempting to do in that motion, but I don't know that I've stated it correctly.
Julie, I withdraw my comments for this. The motion we're making is for Hank to put this into the draft budget.
Right, for our 2021 budget. That they come to us and
it's adequate for that.
Plenty tight for that purpose. Yep.
Okay. May I
call for the vote?
Call for the vote. Are we all right with that? Can I go back to seeing everybody and not the screen?
Oh, 1 second.
Thank you. Okay, so all in favor of my motion? Can I see hands? Okay, so I've got Mike, Julie, Karen, John, Sarah, and Bob. Is that correct?
I from Ben.
And I from Ben. So we have all 7. There's my checklist. Thank you. Okay, so that we had no no's and no abstains. All right. So I think we're now at the point executive session. If I'm correct, we've gone through all the presentations and the funding requests, so we still may make our 10 o'clock.
May I ask for about a 2-minute break to stand up and stretch my?
Yeah, I do this meeting standing up. So yes, we'll move into,
I move that we
into executive session.
move into executive session to discuss contractual matters. I believe that's all it is, contractual matters.
It is all that is.
To be
Second,
clear, there's no need to discuss anything with council from this board.
as long as Chris's contractual items, I think you are correct, Tony.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, Mickey. Okay, so all in favor of going into executive session?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, take your 2 minutes and we'll see you on the other side.
On the other side. Oh, that sounds ominous.
There isn't any,
And for the other
Oh, there it is.
members that are on tonight, we'll be coming out of executive session and basically adjourning. So it's up to you. If you wish to wait, you're more than welcome to sit and wait and chat among yourselves, I guess, or not. And otherwise, thank you very much for coming. Christina, are we ready to re-engage?
Sure.
All right. Mr. Mooney? You're on mute or something. You're on mute. Sorry. There we go.
Madam President, I move that the Reston Association Board of Directors certifies to the best of each member's knowledge that only those matters appropriate for executive session of a contractual nature were heard, discussed, or considered by the board during executive session.
And is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye from Ben.
Thank you, Ben. Aye from Mike. All right. I think we got all ayes. And we have a second motion to,
Madam Chair, I believe I heard Director Anton make a motion that after the competitive bidding process and in accordance with the association's policies on purchasing and procurement, to approve the construction agreements for Tennis Courts Inc., ProPave, and Total Development Solutions as presented in executive session.
second. Thank you, Bob. All in favor?
Aye.
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 I think that's unanimous. And one more motion for the evening.
Madam Chair, I move we adjourn.
Second? I'll second it. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all who stayed with us to come back out, and thank you for being here for the evening.
And Christina, blessings on you. Much,
Yes.
Absolutely agree with that.
much happy.
Blessings. Thank you, Christina.
Thank you.
Safe.
Don't forget to come back.
Absolutely.
And for those of you keeping score, I beat Larry tonight.
All right.
By like 11 minutes.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
A win is a win.
That's right. A win is a win. And
We just have to see you to collect, Tony.
That's right.
Baker, you.
Good night, everyone.
all of tonight's board meeting, I've got a new stuffed toy that's been destroyed.
Good night.
Good night.
I can see everybody.
Good night.